They say respect is earned, not assumed. But in America, assumptions come first. Especially when you're a black woman in a car that looks too expensive, driving alone after dark. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't swerving. I wasn't doing anything except existing. But that was enough. I had just left the secure perimeter of a classified meeting downtown. We'd spent hours dissecting threat assessments and finalizing updated homeland protocols. Everyone in the room had clearance, military, CIA, DHS, Joint Terrorism Task Force. And I was the one running point, chief of the bureau, final signature on every page. Still, out here on the stretch of City Road in San Diego, the only thing visible to that man was skin and silhouette. He didn't see the hours, the weight of command, the decisions that could move agents or armies. He didn't see the woman who negotiated with foreign attaches and led multi-agency operations across continents. He saw someone he could stop, someone he could intimidate, because in his world, power looks a certain way and I didn't fit. I remember the way the lights hit the side mirror, the sudden burst of red and blue that drowned out the amber calm of the street lamps. The siren had long gone quiet, but its echo still buzzed in the space between my ribs. I pulled over. Smooth, practiced, left turn signal on, hands visible, engine off, and I waited. It wasn't fear that settled in my chest. Not exactly. It was something colder, something more familiar, the kind of chill you learn to wear when you've spent a career watching others ignore protocol the moment you enter a room. The kind of awareness you develop when your badge doesn't protect you from bias, just teaches you how to navigate it. I watched him approach in the side mirror. Wide stance. Thumb looped around his belt. Other hand near the holster. He didn't walk. He advanced like he was already preparing to escalate. The sidewalk was empty. The night silent. But somehow everything felt loud. I exhaled, counted 3 beats, and rolled the window down. My voice didn't shake. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" The streets were quiet that evening, the city bathed in the golden glow of streetlights. Special Agent Celeste Morgan, the FBI chief, had just left a high-profile security meeting at a government facility in San Diego. She preferred to drive herself when she could. Years in law enforcement had made her appreciate the solitude of the open road. Dressed in business casual attire with her badge tucked safely in her bag, Celeste was making her way home when she noticed flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. She sighed and pulled over, wondering what the issue was. The patrol car stopped behind me, its headlights burning into my side mirrors like spotlights on a stage I never auditioned for. I could see his silhouette through the glare, broad shoulders, squared jaw, and a pace that said he wasn't coming to help. He was coming to assert. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, elbows locked, wrist steady. The window was already down. The night air drifted in, brushing against the edge of my collar. It was quiet, too quiet. The officer leaned down. License and registration. No greeting, no explanation, just command. His voice was sharp, the kind that cuts straight through tone and into judgment. I turned slightly to meet his eyes. They didn't flicker with curiosity or concern, only control. "Good evening, officer," I said calmly. "Is there a reason I'm being stopped?" He didn't blink. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for." I inhaled slowly. "And what description would that be?" He didn't answer. His gaze darted across the interior of my car like it was a crime scene, searching for justification. Something. Anything. I stayed still. "Step out of the vehicle." The command dropped like a stone between us. I didn't move. "Unless you have probable cause," I said. "I'd like to understand the basis for that request." He shifted his weight. His right hand hovered close to his hip, not yet drawing, but near enough to be loud in its own language. I said, "Step out of the car." His tone had changed. Louder, tighter. I swallowed hard. Not from fear, from calculation. There's a moment in every field agent's life when instinct and training lock eyes. And you realize this is it. The part they can't write into a manual. The moment where your decisions don't just define outcomes, they define survival. I gave a slight nod, slow and deliberate. "I'm complying," I said clearly. I reached for my purse in the passenger seat, every movement exaggerated and visible. No sudden shifts, no questions later. As I opened the door and stepped out, the officer moved in, fast. He grabbed my arm before I'd fully straightened. His grip was firm, unnecessary. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he barked. My eyes locked onto his. "I work in this city," I answered. "I'm on my way home." He scoffed. "Yeah? Doing what? You don't look like you belong around here." My jaw clenched, but I kept my tone even. "Officer, I suggest you pause and think carefully about where this is going." He chuckled. Not kindly. "Why's that?" I said nothing. Instead, I slowly reached into my purse, my fingers finding the edge of the badge holder I'd tucked away earlier. I didn't rush. I didn't flinch. I lifted it with purpose. And when I flipped it open, the glint of the gold and the bold block letters, Federal Bureau of Investigation, cut through the darkness like a floodlight. His face changed before the words even left my mouth. "I'm Celeste Morgan," I said, voice level. "Chief of Operations, FBI." His mouth parted slightly. His pupils widened. He took half a step back, as if the distance might erase what had just happened. But nothing could. His face was still, frozen, like he hadn't fully processed what I just said. Or maybe he had and couldn't believe it. The badge in my hand didn't move. I held it steady, arm extended, letting him absorb every letter printed in black and gold. "Chief of Operations," I repeated, slower this time. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I watched the edges of his confidence collapse. The way his weight shifted back slightly, the sudden blink, the twitch at his temple. It was like watching a mask dislodge, one he wore so naturally he didn't even realize it was part of him until it slipped. I didn't realize you didn't ask," I said, cutting through his words. "You assumed." I could hear my own heartbeat. Not from adrenaline, but from the discipline it took to stay calm, to stay still when everything inside me screamed to say more. To do more. That wasn't the agent in me. That was the woman who'd lived through this scene too many times. In airports, on sidewalks, at hotel check-ins. Always polite, always professional. Still treated like a threat until proven otherwise. And sometimes not even then. I dropped my hand to my side, the badge still open. His eyes were stuck on it. My name, my title, my authority, all the things he hadn't thought mattered 5 minutes ago. A second set of headlights pulled up behind his squad car. Another cruiser. More uniformed officers. The doors opened and 2 figures stepped out. One of them froze. Recognition dawning instantly. "Chief Morgan," he called out, already moving toward me. It was Sergeant Anderson. I'd seen him at interagency briefings over the years. He wasn't FBI, but he knew who I was, and more importantly, he knew how to read a situation. He looked from me to the officer beside me. "Is everything okay here, ma'am?" I nodded once, then turned my body just slightly toward Anderson, but didn't lower my voice. "Not really. Your officer here decided to detain and question me without cause." Anderson's eyes narrowed. "Without cause?" He said I fit a description. Anderson turned his full attention to the officer. "Delaney, you pulled over the FBI chief?" The other officer, Delaney, swallowed. "I didn't know, that's the problem," I said quietly. "You never cared to find out. You saw a black woman behind the wheel of a clean car in a quiet neighborhood, and that was enough for you to flip a switch." Anderson didn't speak. Not immediately. But I saw his jaw tighten. "We've worked too hard," I added, "too long to let moments like this slide under the radar." There was no need to raise my voice. The authority in my tone came from something deeper, something earned. And it filled the space more powerfully than volume ever could. Anderson nodded slowly, then turned to Delaney. "Hand over your badge and sidearm. Effective immediately, you're suspended." The silence that followed was thick. Delaney looked between us. "Wait, sir, you heard me," Anderson said, voice like ice. "Badge. Gun. Now." Delaney hesitated. Then, slowly, he unhooked his belt, unclipped the holster, and placed both items into Anderson's outstretched hand. His eyes never left mine. But they no longer held challenge. Just the raw, quiet realization that everything he'd built or thought he'd built had just unraveled. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Delaney stood motionless. No words. No defense. Just the heavy presence of a man realizing too late that his uniform didn't make him invincible. The silence stretched between us longer than it needed to, but I let it. Sometimes the pause speaks louder than the punishment. I turned back towards Sergeant Anderson, keeping my tone measured. I expect a full report on how this department intends to handle what just happened." He nodded stiffly. "Yes, ma'am. You'll have it." Delaney's hands twitched. His jaw moved like he wanted to say something to salvage some part of what he thought was his authority. But there was nothing left to hold on to. Not in front of me. Not in front of his fellow officers. Not in front of the truth. I started to turn toward my car, but something made me stop. I faced him one last time. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. "You thought you were in control," I said evenly. "You thought your badge gave you the right to interrogate, detain, and disrespect someone who didn't look like you. You didn't see a federal chief. You didn't see a professional. You saw a problem. That's what makes you dangerous." His throat moved in a dry swallow. He didn't answer. "You were given authority to protect people. And instead, you used it to confirm your bias. That makes every badge on the street a little less credible." Anderson looked down briefly. The officers beside him stood still, silent, listening. I took one more breath, then turned and walked away. The air felt different now. Thinner. Not colder, but sharper. Like the street itself had shifted. My car door clicked open with a soft pull. I slid in, the leather cool against my back. The badge was still in my lap. I looked at it not as a symbol of power, but as a reminder of burden. Of battles fought silently daily. This had not been a victory. It had been a necessity. I started the engine. The soft hum of ignition was the first sound to interrupt the stillness. I looked through the windshield. Delaney hadn't moved. Neither had Anderson. Before driving off, I lowered the window halfway and called out without turning. "Next time, think before you act. You never know who you're dealing with." The window slid shut, and I drove away. The engine purred beneath my feet, but I didn't rush. I stayed still for a moment longer, letting the weight of everything settle into the silence. Outside, the air remained heavy. Anderson stood where I left him, his eyes forward. Delaney still hadn't moved. I watched him in the rearview mirror, rigid, pale, as if the uniform had turned to stone around him. Not in defense. In defeat. Then, a slight movement. Delaney's hand slowly came up to cover his face. Not to cry. Just to hide. I didn't look away. Because this was part of the reckoning too. When the powerful are forced to look at themselves and don't like what they see. I shifted into drive. But even as the tires began to roll forward, my mind lingered on the quiet that had followed my last words. The kind of quiet that sticks with people. The kind that plants itself in the conscience and doesn't let go. I didn't need sirens. I didn't need headlines. I just needed them to remember. One mistake. One assumption. One woman who refused to shrink. As I turned the corner and the street disappeared behind me, I thought of the next young woman who might get stopped on her way home. And I hoped this moment would echo long enough to change something for her. Or at least make someone hesitate before they reach for their holster. The road ahead was clear. But the road to this moment? It had been paved in silence, improving myself over and over, in walking into rooms where I was the only one who looked like me and staying anyway. I thought of my father. A man of quiet pride. He never wore a badge, but he walked like he could command a room just by existing. I remember him saying, "Being right isn't enough, baby girl. You have to be undeniable." I hated that sentence when I was younger, but I came to understand. It wasn't surrender, it was strategy. And I thought of my mother. Her hands smelled of lavender lotion and copier ink from the school where she worked. She used to brush my hair every morning and say, "They'll stare, but let them. Your dignity scares small minds." I held on to that. Especially on the days the stares weren't just stares. On the days they came with questions I'd already answered. With doubt I hadn't earned. With hands that hovered too close to weapons while my hands stayed still. Tonight was one of those days. But I had walked through enough of them to know I didn't need to raise my voice to raise a mirror. I had survived too much to give this moment more than it deserved. And yet I had given it everything it needed. A line drawn. A lesson delivered. Not with vengeance. With clarity. The city stretched ahead of me. Quiet, golden under streetlights, unaware that just blocks behind, a man had been asked, without a word, to rethink everything. Some would say I'd embarrassed him. But I hadn't. He embarrassed himself. I just didn't let him get away with it. And tomorrow, I'd wake up, put on the same clothes, carry the same badge, walk into the same rooms. But I'd walk in knowing I hadn't backed down. Not this time. And if this story reached someone, just one person who needed it to breathe a little deeper or stand a little taller, then maybe it wasn't just my moment. Maybe it was ours. The next morning, the sun broke clean across the skyline. San Diego moved like it always did. Runners pacing sidewalks, buses rumbling past intersections, baristas scribbling names on cups. But for me, Everything carried a sharper edge. Inside the federal building, the air was crisp, controlled. I passed security, badge already in hand. Nobody questioned me today. The briefing room wasn't packed, but it was full enough. Regional heads, agency liaisons, a few young recruits standing in the back, eyes wide. They had no idea what had happened last night, but they'd hear it now. I stepped to the front without ceremony. No introduction, just silence, the kind that waits for weight. I wasn't going to talk about this, I said, voice steady. But silence never protected me, and it sure as hell won't protect the next one. The room shifted, attention locked in. Last night I was stopped, no reason given, just a demand, just suspicion in a uniform, a pause. I complied, because I know what can happen if I don't. Complied, and still I was grabbed, questioned, challenged, not because I broke a law, but because I broke his expectation. A murmur in the back, then stillness again. You see, I didn't fit. Not his version of who belongs behind the wheel of a clean government car, driving through a quiet part of town. And it didn't matter what badge I carried, because my skin showed up before my credentials ever did. A younger agent flinched. An older one looked down. I've led operations on 4 continents, sat across from heads of state, negotiated counterterrorism frameworks that protect millions. But to one officer in uniform, I was just a question mark. A threat in heels. I took a slow breath. But I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't run. I stood still. I showed him my badge. I let him see exactly who he put his hands on. A beat. And in that moment, he didn't just lose control of the situation. He lost the story he'd built in his head about people like me. No one moved. No one coughed. The silence had changed. It wasn't polite anymore. It was reckoning. I tell you this not for pity, and not for applause, but because we all wear this badge. And every time someone abuses it, they make it harder for the rest of us to wear it with pride. I scanned the room. No one broke eye contact. So the question is, when it's your partner, your shift mate, your friend who crosses that line, what will you do? Silence again. That officer was suspended. There will be an investigation. But that's not justice. That's just paperwork. Real justice is when the next black woman driving home doesn't get profiled. When she doesn't have to keep her hands visible. When her silence isn't mistaken for submission, but recognized as strength. Someone across the room nodded. Another shifted forward in their seat. I straightened. This isn't just about race. It's about assumption. About unchecked power. About how easy it is to make someone feel small when you think your title makes you big. Then I softened. Just enough. I'm still here, still standing, and still ready to lead. But don't mistake composure for forgiveness. And don't mistake professionalism for passivity. I closed the file in front of me. I hadn't opened it once. But as I reached for it, I paused and turned back. You know, I added, quieter now. There was a time I wouldn't have shared this, would have let it pass, smiled through it, kept the room comfortable, because I was taught early, make no one uneasy. Don't give them reason to question how you got here. I glanced toward the back of the room where a young woman, new recruit, hair in a tight bun, stood just a little taller now. But comfort never changed anything, and silence has a cost. I won't pay it anymore. A soft exhale from someone near the wall. Shoes shifted, arms uncrossed. I looked out at the faces again. Some I knew, some I barely recognized. But all of them would carry the story with them now. What they did with it, that was theirs. Meeting adjourned. I stepped down, not just as chief, but as proof. And when I walked out, the echo of my heels didn't sound like retreat. It sounded like a line drawn once and held,